one thing that I do love about you and who it is that God's designed you to be as a therapist is that there is such a deep integration for your passion, that it is widespread. It's not just something you say, like, I'm passionate about this. Like, you see it flow out of the work that you do. And so you actually wrote an article recently, which I love the title of it. I want to say it like word for word because I think it's brilliant, is Game Night, the Not So Fun Games We Play in Marriage and How to Win Them, Part 1. And so this idea of the healthy relationships, couples counseling, again, you kind of dive into it here with your writing. And so tell us a little bit about who you wrote this article for.
Yeah, so the article is kind of mostly, I kind of wrote it for couples because there's lots of kind of games that we play in these relationships. So the thing is
Mhm.
that all of us kind of have, every person kind of has the same set of needs in terms of we all need acceptance and belonging. We all need to know that we are loved just as we are. But because of the way that life has shaped us and sometimes like the deprivation of needs that we've actually experienced in life, we go about getting these needs met in a really kind of nasty way. And
Mm.
they, like you hear people say like, don't play games with me, right? But the reason why we play those types of kind of nasty games is because we have a really basic need that's probably not getting met, and we've learned to get that need met using just like power and authority and control. And so we, it's a good thing, but we go about it in the wrong way.
So in your article, you use three illustrations of different games, quote unquote, that we play in marriage or in relationships. Can you talk about each one of those three games, which again, totally followed the imagery, the illustrations? They were so incredibly powerful.
So yeah, what this article is, or what that game in particular is about, is whose fault is it anyway? It's this idea that we are always looking to like shift blame. That when it comes to somebody kind of pointing out our faults, we're always looking to kind of not be the one in the hot seat, right? Like, and we'd have a hard time taking responsibility. So what happens is someone brings something to our attention, and we're like, oh well, I did that thing because you did this thing, and they can say, oh well, I did that thing because you did this thing, and there's just kind of like we kind of backstep all the way back, right? And it becomes this really kind of nasty cycle where no one actually owns anything and nothing ever changes. And
Mm.
so, as long as that, and as long as we stay in that place, we are never able to actually make changes. If we constantly deflect, we can never reflect, right?
Ooh, that's
And
so
so,
good.
yeah, and so it's this the way that we kind of win that game is to stop the deflection, right? We can kind of, what are they saying? Maybe our spouse is not communicating to us the right way. Maybe it's full of emotion or anger or whatever the case might be. But there's a good chance that what they're saying has some truth in it. So
Mm.
let's see if we can find that kind of nugget of truth, regardless of the affect, regardless of the way that they're coming at us. Can we find that nugget of truth and say, okay, I want to be made into the likeness of Jesus, right? And can I use this as an opportunity to do that? We
Mm.
know that we are never more refined as we are in marriage, because there's somebody constantly kind of holding up a mirror to us in
Yeah.
ways that we might never ever actually see. And so we can take that as an opportunity to reflect and
Mm.
to allow ourselves to be refined and sanctified, if we are willing to take responsibility for ourselves and our actions.
Mm. Wow, that's so good. So good. And so then the second game that you talked about, which loved this game back in the day. And as you were sharing about it, I was like, oh my goodness, this is again how we go about in an unhealthy way of meeting those core needs of ours is let's make a deal, which I feel like the title itself kind of just like preaches the point, so to speak. So tell us a little bit about Let's Make a Deal.
Yeah, right. So just that article's all, or that kind of a game is all about the this idea of how do I make a deal to get my needs met, right?
Mm.
How can I kind of compromise, or what can I do to get these needs met? And so it's this idea of like, I'll do this for you if you do this for me, right?
Mm.
Or I'll compromise what I want so that you can be happy.
Mm.
And it's not, and so we end up having these like ledgers in our relationships where we're like trying to like keep score,
Mm.
right, of on both sides. Or a lot of times what happens is, um it can often be a dramatic imbalance to where one person is doing all of the compromising and the other person is asking all of the compromises, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so there's this kind of like power imbalance in the relationship that is pretty unhealthy. And so what I encourage couples to do in that section of the article is basically to, like, let's have a conversation about what's the impact of this on our person, right? Like, how is your heart being affected by this? What is it like for you to constantly be compromising? What is it like for you to kind of be keeping this ledger in your mind? That's
Mm,
not the unconditional love that we're called to have for each other, right?
mm,
And so, what I encourage people to do is to begin, if you're the person that's doing a lot of compromising and you're feeling just kind of like walked all over in the relationship, it's time to use your voice. It's time to start asserting your needs and saying that this is not okay and my needs are not being met and something's got to shift here. And oftentimes in a loving relationship, that's enough. But sometimes
yeah.
it's not. Sometimes one person asserting their voice, the other person, they can't hear it. They're not willing to compromise the power that they have in the relationship. And in that case, I recommend couples counseling. Come see us. Let us help you in that kind of a situation to regain the equality that there should
Mm.
be in a marriage.
That's so good. So practical. And the last game that you shared about and you pulled truths from is the game Jeopardy. Tell
Yeah.
us about that.
Yeah, so Jeopardy was one of those shows that was on in my house every single night. Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy, it was like my dad's
Yes.
favorite. And I've always been like enthralled with these contestants. I'm like, how do they know so much about so many random things? Like, who actually has that much knowledge? And so, but I was just thinking about, like, there's nothing more dramatic than that final Jeopardy round. We all know the Jeopardy tune that starts playing. You can probably hear it in your
Yes.
head right now as we're talking about it. And like that final Jeopardy round where they're like sweating bullets, hoping they got the answer right, hoping they waged just enough money to win the game, And then how many times have we seen it where it's like, oh, they were just like a couple dollars off or like $100 off from the contestant next to them and they end up not getting, first place, right? And so I was thinking about how in our marriage, in marriages, we can have these kind of like, the tension is so thick, you can cut it with a knife kind of moments, right? Where it's like,
Mm-hmm.
I have this hard question to ask, or this hard conversation, or I need to confront them with something, and it just doesn't feel good. It's hard. It's
Mm,
really, really hard. And all of the resistance kind of rises up inside of us. And the resistance feels like tension, and it happens, and it's like palpable, like you can feel yourself sweating before the conversation even starts. And so whether you're the one having to ask the question or being asked the question, it feels so tense. And so again, we've got to find a different way. Nobody wins this game, right? And so we've got to find a different way. And what I recommend in this section in this of the article is that we one normalize hard conversations, right?
mm,
We'd have to just know that, like, that is part of a loving, thriving, healthy relationship. That there's hard conversations that need to be had and tough questions that we have to ask. And sometimes we have to be confronted with our stuff and know it doesn't feel good, but we all fall on the grace of God. And truly, what we desire is to be fully known, to fully know and to be fully known. And that can only happen if we are fully truthful. And so I
wow,
just
that's so
encourage
good.
everyone, yeah. So I just encourage us to lean into truth and honesty in those moments, allow ourselves to be kind of known and loved in our most vulnerable places.
Mm.
And then we kind of are able to inch our way towards this kind of unconditional love of God within our marriages.
Wow, that's so powerful and so, 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 so good. To be fully known is to be fully truthful. I need to write
Mhm.
that down and remember that. That is so, so good. So, my question for you, Tara, is why do so many married couples play these games so often?
Yeah, yeah. Wow, that's a great question. So I think that we play these games because oftentimes I don't think we know any other way. Life can be tough on a lot of us, and so we have learned what we would call in counseling like maladaptive methods. In other words, like all of these ways of going about getting these really good needs met in all of the wrong ways. Like we've learned we have to use power and we have to use control. We have to use manipulation and, and compromise and blame shifting, and, creating these tense moments to get what we want, to get what
Mhm.
we need, right? And so we play these games because we think it's the only way. And honestly, I also think a big piece of it is there's not enough healthy models in the world for us,
Mm.
right? In order to like, what does it look like for us to get our needs met in a healthy way? Right.
Yeah.
So many of us, it's like, this is what we saw modeled in our homes growing up. This is what we've experienced in the world. And so it's just kind of, we just perpetuate what we've learned, what we've
Mm.
internalized from the world.
So, so, so insightful. So, what next step or advice would you give to a couple who wants to, again, take like that next step, that first step in
Mhm.
really ending playing these games with each other?
Yeah. Yeah, so it kind of depends on the game, but I think that, kind of the common thread through all three of, my recommendations in terms of playing these games um is to, it all comes back to speak the truth in love, right? Speak the truth in love, and but let your conversations always be seasoned with grace. And I think that like that's the scripture that I think that really kind of encompasses all of this is we have to speak, right? We have to speak, which too many times we let our voices be muted or compromised in relationships, right?
Mm.
We don't actually speak for our needs. We don't speak our feelings. We don't speak from our experience. We just stay quiet. So first we have to speak, and we have to do that with love and with grace. And so love both for the Lord, but love for ourselves and love for our spouse, right? So speak in the way that you want to be spoken to, right? And with gentleness and respect, right? But also in love, yes, for the spouse, but also for like the Lord tells us to guard our hearts, right? And if we're constantly putting everyone else before ourselves, which is what we're told to do, then what
Mhm.
happens is at times people can take advantage of that, right? In an
Mm.
ideal world, that would be reciprocal, right?
Mhm.
But that's not always what happens. And so we speak with love and with grace, and that grace and love are both for ourselves and for other,
Mm.
and for the Lord as well.
Mm. So, so good. Thank you. I really appreciate you sharing your heart and your passion and putting it on paper. And one thing that I do love about the title of the article is that it says part one. So I'm hopeful there's going to be a part two, maybe.
Yes, there's definitely going to be a part two, possibly even a part three. Yeah, there's lots of these kind of games came to mind as I started brainstorming for this article. So there will definitely be additional parts to it. Mhm.
Love it. That's so awesome.